Caroline sighed as she stared out the window of her small apartment, watching the rain trickle down the glass. Another dreary day in Seattle. At 40, she felt stuck in a rut. Unfulfilling job, non-existent love life, same old routines day after day. She longed for excitement, passion, adventure. Little did she know her life was about to change dramatically. A knock at the door startled her out of her melancholy musings. Caroline wasn't expecting anyone. Curious, she opened the door to find a handsome stranger standing there, soaking wet from the rain. "I'm so sorry to bother you," the man said, flashing an apologetic smile that made Caroline's heart skip a beat. "My car broke down just down the street and my phone is dead. Could I possibly use your phone to call for a tow truck?" "Of course," Caroline replied, stepping back to let him in. "I'm Caroline, by the way." "Hudson," the man said, extending his hand. "Thanks so much for your help." As Hudson made his call, Caroline couldn't help but admire him. Tall and athletic, with tousled dark hair and striking green eyes, he was easily the most attractive man she'd seen in ages. There was something magnetic about his presence. After hanging up, Hudson turned to Caroline. "The tow truck won't be here for at least an hour with this traffic. Would you mind terribly if I waited here? I'd be happy to treat you to dinner to make up for the imposition." Caroline hesitated for just a moment before agreeing. She knew it was risky to let a stranger into her home, but something in Hudson's warm smile and kind eyes put her at ease. Plus, the thought of having dinner with this intriguing man was too tempting to pass up. As they waited for the tow truck, Caroline and Hudson fell into easy conversation. She learned he was new to Seattle, having just moved from New York for a job in finance. Hudson was charming and funny, regaling Caroline with stories of his adventures and mishaps in the big city. For the first time in ages, Caroline found herself laughing and smiling freely. When the tow truck finally arrived, Caroline was almost disappointed. She'd been enjoying Hudson's company so much, she didn't want the evening to end. To her delight, Hudson insisted on making good on his offer of dinner. "I know a great little Italian place just down the street," he said. "What do you say we walk over there and continue getting to know each other?" Caroline readily agreed, grabbing an umbrella big enough for two. As they strolled arm in arm through the rainy streets, she felt a spark of excitement. This chance encounter was turning into quite an adventure. Over a candlelit dinner of pasta and wine, Caroline and Hudson's connection deepened. They discovered shared passions for travel, classic films, and obscure indie bands. Hudson's eyes lit up as Caroline described her dream of opening her own bookstore cafe someday. She, in turn, was fascinated by his tales of high-stakes business deals and jet-setting around the globe. As the evening went on, Caroline found herself opening up in a way she hadn't with anyone in years. There was just something about Hudson that made her feel safe and understood. For his part, Hudson seemed equally captivated by Caroline. His gaze never left her face as she spoke, drinking in her every word. When they finally left the restaurant hours later, the rain had stopped, and stars were peeking through breaks in the clouds. Neither wanted the night to end. "Would you like to take a walk along the waterfront?" Hudson asked. "It's such a beautiful night now." Caroline nodded, her heart fluttering with anticipation. As they strolled along the moonlit pier, Hudson reached for her hand. His touch sent shivers down her spine. They paused at the end of the pier, gazing out at the twinkling city lights reflected on the dark water. Hudson turned to face Caroline, gently brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "I know we just met," he said softly, "but I feel like I've known you forever. There's something special about you, Caroline." Before she could respond, Hudson leaned in and kissed her. It was soft and sweet at first, then deepened with rising passion. Caroline melted into his embrace, her whole body tingling. When they finally parted, both were breathless. "Wow," Caroline whispered. "Yeah," Hudson agreed with a grin. "I'd really like to see you again, Caroline. Soon." "I'd like that too," she replied, unable to stop smiling. They exchanged numbers and Hudson insisted on walking Caroline home. At her door, he gave her one more lingering kiss goodnight that left her weak in the knees. As she got ready for bed that night, Caroline's mind was reeling. In the span of one evening, her boring, predictable life had been turned upside down. She'd connected with Hudson in a way she never had with anyone before. For the first time in years, she felt truly alive with possibility and hope. Over the next few weeks, Caroline and Hudson's whirlwind romance blossomed. They were practically inseparable, stealing every possible moment together between work commitments. Hudson surprised Caroline with impromptu picnics in the park, midnight skinny dipping at the beach, and salsa dancing lessons. Each day brought new adventures and deeper feelings. Caroline had never felt so cherished and adored. Hudson was attentive and affectionate, always finding little ways to show he was thinking of her. He left her sweet notes, brought her favorite coffee in the mornings, and gave her long massages after stressful days at work. When they made love, it was passionate and tender in equal measure. For his part, Hudson seemed equally smitten. He confided in Caroline that he'd never opened up to anyone the way he did with her. She made him want to be a better man, he said. With Caroline by his side, he felt like anything was possible. As weeks turned to months, their bond only grew stronger. They began talking about the future, moving in together, marriage, starting a family someday. Caroline had never been so blissfully happy. She'd found her soulmate in Hudson and couldn't imagine life without him. But their perfect love story was about to hit some major obstacles. It started with little things Caroline began to notice. Hudson would sometimes get mysterious phone calls that he'd step away to take in private. His stories about his past and family didn't always add up, and he was strangely reluctant to introduce Caroline to any of his work colleagues or friends. At first, Caroline brushed off her concerns. She trusted Hudson completely and didn't want to seem paranoid or clingy. But as the inconsistencies piled up, she couldn't ignore the nagging doubts any longer. Finally, she decided to do some digging. Using her research skills from her job as a librarian, Caroline began investigating Hudson's background. What she discovered left her reeling. Hudson Parker didn't exist, at least not the version Caroline knew. His real name was Henry Pearson, and he was a notorious con artist wanted in multiple states for fraud and theft. He'd been pulling the same scam for years, sweeping lonely, vulnerable women off their feet, gaining their trust, then cleaning out their bank accounts before disappearing. Caroline felt like she'd been punched in the gut. How could she have been so blind? She'd truly believed Hudson, Henry, loved her. Had it all been a lie from the very beginning? Devastated and furious, Caroline confronted Henry with what she'd learned. To her shock, instead of denying it, he broke down and confessed everything. Through tears, he swore that while their relationship may have started as a con, his feelings for her were real. Caroline was different from anyone he'd ever met, he said. She made him want to change, to be worthy of her love. Caroline didn't know what to believe. Part of her wanted desperately to trust Henry, to believe their love was strong enough to overcome his criminal past. But the rational part of her brain knew she'd be a fool to fall for his lies again. In the end, Caroline told Henry she needed time and space to process everything. With a heavy heart, she asked him to leave and not contact her. As she watched him walk away, Caroline broke down sobbing. How had her great love story turned into such a nightmare? The next few weeks were the darkest of Caroline's life. She alternated between crushing sadness, white-hot anger, and numb disbelief. She barely ate or slept, going through the motions at work like a zombie. Her friends tried to comfort her, but Caroline shut everyone out. The pain and humiliation were too much to bear. Just when Caroline had hit rock bottom, thinking she'd never recover from Henry's betrayal, fate intervened once again. She was leaving work late one rainy night when she quite literally ran into a man rushing into the library just as she was locking up. Papers went flying everywhere as they collided. "I'm so sorry," the man exclaimed, scrambling to help Caroline gather the scattered documents. "I was in such a hurry I wasn't watching where I was going." "It's okay, really," Caroline assured him as she looked up and felt her breath catch. The man was gorgeous, with warm brown eyes and a kind smile that made her heart skip a beat. There was something vaguely familiar about him, though Caroline was sure they'd never met. "I'm Max," he said, extending his hand. "I feel terrible about this. Can I buy you a coffee to make up for nearly bowling you over?" Caroline hesitated. After everything that had happened with Henry, the last thing she wanted was to get involved with another man, especially a handsome stranger. But there was something so earnest and gentle about Max that put her at ease. "Sure," she found herself saying. "I'm Caroline, by the way." Over coffee, Caroline learned that Max was a history professor at the local university. He'd been racing to return some rare books before the library closed. As they chatted, Caroline was struck by how easy and natural their conversation felt. Max was thoughtful and funny, genuinely interested in hearing about Caroline's life and passions. Before she knew it, hours had passed. Caroline was surprised to find herself laughing and smiling, the pain of recent events momentarily forgotten. When Max asked if he could see her again, Caroline surprised herself by saying yes. Over the next few weeks, Caroline and Max began spending more and more time together. Unlike the whirlwind passion of her relationship with Henry, things with Max developed slowly and sweetly. He was patient and understanding, never pushing Caroline for more than she was ready to give. Gradually, Caroline found herself opening up to Max about what had happened with Henry. To her relief, Max was compassionate and non-judgmental. He assured Caroline that Henry's deception was not her fault and that she deserved so much better. With Max's support, Caroline slowly began to heal and rediscover her self-worth. He encouraged her to pursue her dream of opening a bookstore, even offering to help with the business plan. For the first time in months, Caroline felt hopeful about the future again. As her feelings for Max deepened, Caroline realized she was falling in love again. But this time, it was built on a solid foundation of trust, respect, and genuine connection. Max's steady presence and unwavering support gave her the strength to fully let go of the past and embrace new possibilities. Just when everything seemed to be falling into place, Caroline's world was rocked once again. Henry suddenly reappeared, claiming he'd turned himself in and served time for his crimes. He'd gotten help, he said, and wanted to make amends. He begged Caroline for another chance, swearing he was a changed man who truly loved her. Caroline was torn. Part of her still cared for Henry and wanted to believe he'd reformed. But she'd also found real, lasting happiness with Max. She knew she had an impossible choice to make. In the end, Caroline realized that while her feelings for Henry had been intense, what she had with Max was deeper and truer. Max had been there for her through the darkest time in her life, loving her patiently and selflessly. She couldn't throw away their beautiful relationship for the uncertain promise of a fresh start with Henry. With tears in her eyes, Caroline told Henry that while she forgave him, too much had happened between them. She wished him well, but said her heart belonged to Max now. It was painful, but Caroline knew she was making the right choice. When she told Max about Henry's return and her decision, he hugged her tightly and thanked her for choosing him. He then got down on one knee and proposed, saying he wanted to spend the rest of his life proving worthy of her love and trust. Through happy tears, Caroline said yes. She knew that while their love story hadn't been perfect, it was real and lasting. Max was her true soulmate, the one who'd been there through it all. Together, they would build the life of their dreams. 5 years later, Caroline and Max were blissfully happy. They'd married in a beautiful ceremony surrounded by loved ones. Caroline's bookstore cafe was thriving, with Max often dropping by to grade papers or just surprise her with coffee. They'd even welcomed twins, a boy and girl, who were the light of their lives. Looking back, Caroline marveled at the twists and turns that had led her to this moment. While the pain of Henry's betrayal had nearly broken her, it had also led her to Max and the life she'd always dreamed of. She'd learned that true love isn't about grand gestures or intense passion, but about choosing each other every day through good times and bad. As she watched Max playing with their giggling children in the backyard, Caroline's heart swelled with gratitude and joy. This was where she belonged. This was her happily ever after.